nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So, like we've said already, the central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord, any nerves that are going to be within that. And then the peripheral nervous system is anything outside of the brain and spinal cord. So, the central nervous system, we're going to talk about first. So, the central nervous system is composed, like again, this brain and the spinal cord. So the brain is divided into four major regions. It is going to be the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. We're going to go through those structures and functions of each. So looking at those, the cerebrum is going to be this upper part of the brain. This is the largest part of the brain, is going to be the cerebrum. Then you have the diencephalon, which is actually on the inside of the brain. It's the inner brain. The cerebellum is going to be this lower back portion of the brain, and then the brainstem is this lower brain, which then would attach to the spinal cord, which would then continue your central nervous system. The cerebellum is going to have two hemispheres, so meaning it's on both sides of the brain. Okay, it has this convoluted surface, but definitely a different texture than you have for the cerebrum up here. This is going to help with controlling balance and equilibrium. So I have a picture of Simone Biles just to kind of remind me, hey, this is going to have to do with balance. Then we have the diencephalon, which is the inner brain. There are three parts of the diencephalon. We have the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. The hypothalamus is also going to come back into play a lot when we talk about the endocrine system and hormones. The diencephalon, though, is superior to the brainstem. So you have brainstem here. All this region is that diencephalon. The brainstem itself has three parts. So we have the midbrain, the pons, and then the medulla oblongata. So the midbrain is going to be where we have actually some vision and auditory systems with basic eye movement. We have dopamine producing neurons, which are here, which will come into play when we start talking about disorders. Like Parkinson's disease, because Parkinson's disease is actually associated with lack of dopamine. Then we have the pons. The pons is going to help control breathing, sleep, and consciousness. And then the medulla is going to be where we have heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, swallowing. If there's damage to the medulla, or a lot of different parts of the brainstem, but definitely that medulla, if that's damaged, you're very likely to have a fatal injury in that case. So go ahead and pause right here and label the cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, and brainstem based on what we just talked about. Okay, then looking at now the cerebrum more specifically. Remember, the cerebrum is this whole top region. So the cerebrum itself is divided into lobes, which you might have heard of. So we have the frontal lobe at the front, parietal lobe is going to be at the top here, temporal lobe is by your temples, and then occipital lobe is at the back. So looking first at the frontal lobe, there are some specialized areas within the frontal lobe. We have the primary motor area, the interpretation area, and Broca's area. The primary motor area is going to be giving us this fine motor control, so being able to pick up, for example, a pencil. That is going to be fine motor versus gross motor would be like, say, kicking a ball. This is going to be voluntary movement. Very important for the frontal lobe, though, is going to be this interpretation area. This is going to be that higher intellectual reasoning, some language composition, learning what words mean. When we think about just learning and growing and knowing more as you get older and being able to make better and wiser decisions, it's actually your frontal lobe. So your frontal lobe is not fully developed typically until at least 25 years old. So whenever you think about some teenager, let's say, making a bad decision, it's very likely at least slightly associated with an underdeveloped frontal lobe because it's not done yet. On only the left side of the brain, we have this Broca's area. Broca's area is going to be associated with the ability to speak, which is going to be different than another area that we'll talk about, which has to do more with just language. Then we have the parietal lobe. So again, the parietal lobe is more on the top of the brain. This is where taste is interpreted in the gustatory area. And then we also have a somatic sensory area. This is going to be interpreting impulses from sensory receptors such as pain, cold, touch, just how is that interpreted towards how it actually feels rather than, oh, here's a signal coming in. Then we have the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe, again, is going to be this side part where your temples are located. This is going to have Wernicke's area located within it, but not on the right side, actually on this left side only. This is going to help you with sounding out words, understanding written and spoken language. And again, it's at that junction of the temporal, parietal, and occipital, just on the left side. Also in the temporal lobe is the auditory area for hearing. So think about it's close to your ears. And then the olfactory area for smell. So then your ears and your nose are both going to be having interpretation, auditory and olfactory interpretation happening in this temporal lobe. And then the occipital lobe is going to be having our visual area. And that seems like, okay, it only has that one role, but think about how much of our world we're bringing in through visualization. So it is a pretty important role. Go ahead and pause here and fill in the blanks. Okay, moving on, we also have covering the actual central nervous system, these meningeal coverings. So these are going to be protective layers around the brain as well as the spinal cord, all the way down that spinal cord. These are going to help with containing the cerebral spinal fluid. And whenever you think about the term meningitis, these are what are becoming inflamed and causing problems. Cerebral spinal fluid itself is the fluid that fills the spaces within the brain. It also forms this watery cushion and is constantly circulating via these ependymal cells. Remember, the ependymal cells are glial cells, meaning they're not neurons, they're other nervous cells that are actually going to be able to move around via the villi. They're moving around the cerebral spinal fluid, not the cells themselves. A change in the consistency of cerebral spinal fluid can actually signal diseases like meningitis or multiple sclerosis. So that would be when you might do a spinal tap to indicate what the issue might possibly be. The spinal cord itself is, of course, encased in the bones of the vertebral column, and it's transmitting neural signals between the brain and the body, the sensory as well as motor information coming in and out of the spinal cord. And of course, like we mentioned earlier, it's a major center for certain reflexes.